It's a new fiscal year for Microsoft and Xbox, and this is what I'm looking forward to in the year ahead. Microsoft's fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. And what that means, sort of in a nutshell, if you will, is that on July 1st of every year, they sort of reset their expectations and their plans, and reorgs happen and people move about, and Microsoft kicks off a new fiscal year, which the only way I can best describe it is think of it as like how we kind of reset on January 1st. Microsoft does that every year on July 1st. They put into new marketing initiatives, they put on new budgets in place, and they put in new expectations, which means that now is a perfect time to take a look at the year ahead for Microsoft, and more specifically in this video, Xbox. Now, where it gets a little bit confusing is technically now Microsoft is in fiscal year 2023, even though we're still in calendar year 2022. Either way, I've outlined some expectations. I even asked you all on Twitter what you expected here in the year ahead for Microsoft, and I think there's a lot to sort of dive into as we sort of peel back the onion of what we expect out of Microsoft. So let's just kick off the journey here, if you will. So, starting things off with hardware. Now, we have heard time and time again, people are talking about a hardware refresh and like it should be coming and we should be getting more stuff. Now, let's just sort of dial that back. If any sort of hardware refresh is coming, there's two logical approaches that this could be taking from Microsoft. First off is more of a silent refresh where they're just optimizing the chip development, the boards are making things a little bit smaller, make them cooler, make them a little bit better, but there's really no end user benefit. The Xbox One went through several iterations where they calibrated the boards, refreshed them, if you will, internally, just to make them easier to produce and cost less, making Microsoft's margins higher, or potentially allowing them to cut costs, considering that we're entering just about 2 years in this fall timeline of when Microsoft started building the boards. That might be on the agenda. There's other ways that they could go about this too, is hey, they could just start selling a Series X without a disk drive. At the end of the day, I think a lot of us would be interested in a Series X without a disk drive if it would knock $50 or so, say, off the price point. That being said, historically, we have seen price cuts come after a year of console availability, but we all know what has been happening in the world, and we saw no price cuts or anything like that. So we might actually start to see potentially our first true price cut this year. Now, I know a lot of people keep saying, but Brad, they've got to get more power. They've got to give an Xbox Series X Pro or something along those lines. I don't know how much that makes sense currently at this time. First off, it would make their marketing messaging a little bit difficult, but the only way that this would make sense is if they were able to ship a console that could do 4K 120 frames per second on every single game, no matter what. And that's a difficult challenge. That's pretty difficult because right now, if you have a Series X, you've all had the choice choosing between effectively 4K at about 60 frames per second, or you can knock it down to 1080p and get 120 frames per second, sometimes known as performance mode or clarity mode, or just depending on the game. And so if they could get rid of that choice, that would be great, because then you don't have to sacrifice resolution for higher frames rate. But that's the only way really getting more performance out of a console makes sense. I don't know if Microsoft is going to go that route. On the other side, there's other hardware that I believe we actually will see, or at least I know Microsoft is working on it, which is the Elite Series 3 controller. We have the Series 1, known as the original Elite. We have the Series 2, which is out and available now. And we're waiting on the Series 3. Now, if you kind of look at the timeline of these controllers, the first Elite controller was released in 2015. The second one was released in 2019. So you're looking at about a 4-year gap. And this fall would be a 3-year gap for the controller. So maybe we're a little ahead of schedule, but I'm still hoping that we see it. And most importantly, it needs to add the share button. That is something that is missing. Microsoft did do a software update to give it the latest firmware, which allows for slightly lower latency. I think it's dynamic latency is what they've been working on. And so the Elite Series 2 controller is updated, but a Series 3 would be wonderful with that proper share button. I would love, if we're getting out a wish list here, I'd love more mechanical feedback in those buttons, especially those share buttons, because they're a little mushy at the end of the day. Also, Microsoft has told us that Keystone, which is going to be their little streaming box device, I don't think it's a stick, their plans have changed. So we're not expecting that to be arriving this year, and Microsoft is moving in a different direction. And I think we all understand that different direction is working directly with vendors like Samsung and just getting it natively on the TV, and that might be the route that they go. And so I don't know if we're necessarily going to see that type of hardware anytime soon. Now, kicking things over to the software side, Microsoft has done a pretty good job. They update the Xbox OS fairly frequently. I mean, realistically, we get an update every month. Some updates bigger than others. If there is one item that Microsoft needs to address in 2023 when it comes to Xbox software, it is the editor of your game clips. It is horrific. It is outdated. It needs a lot of love, and it's just not a great experience. Microsoft has improved the sharing experience, most notably with a share button, and they've made it a little bit faster and easier, but the capacity to edit your clips is still outdated, and that is something that Microsoft needs to address. Sony has done it on the PlayStation side and dramatically improved that experience, and Microsoft is lagging behind in that area. Now, when it comes to games, we pretty much know the roadmap at this point. The roadmap, Microsoft has been very clear. We know that the big two titles that most of us are looking forward to, Starfield and Redfall, will happen in the second half. They should be out by now. In the second half, the second half of the fiscal year, but the first half of the calendar year, so sometime between January and June of 2023. But there are some other games that have been floating out there that we think might be coming, but we don't have all the firm details yet. The first one, and I think a lot of people are in this boat and we're all waiting on it, is the GoldenEye remake. Remember, the achievements sort of quote-unquote leaked or showed up online, and many of us, myself included, were kind of hoping we were going to see it here in June, but Microsoft did not announce anything. There's also a documentary coming out around this title, and so I think many of us hope to see this. Now, this could be a sort of surprise, if you will, that they are working on, and maybe they will just drop it upon us this fall. We don't know, but that is one title that Microsoft hasn't officially announced that we think might be coming. There's another one floating out too, the Gears of War collection, sort of a Master Chief collection type rumors. There's been a lot of talk about maybe getting remastered, or certain things are happening there, and so we got to be on the lookout for those. Might kind of silently drop, but we don't have any additional information. And then the other thing that I am really waiting to see, because this has a big impact, is Halo Infinite Season 3. Now, we already know the story behind Season 1 and Season 2. They got drug out to 6 months, and honestly, from an outside perspective, it feels a lot like they're just sort of stalling as they continue to work on things in the back end. So, assuming that that is true, that they have a big reveal for Season 3, let's all cross our fingers that Season 3 is a big content drop, and they truly do get onto a more 3-month style release cadence rather than a 6-month style release cadence for Halo Infinite. That game desperately needs a big surge of content. We know we're going to get some updates here soon, things like co-op. We're all looking forward to Forge, and so all these things need to hit at the right time, and Season 3 really needs to knock it out of park for Halo Infinite. Otherwise, I'll be pretty darn concerned about where things are headed for that. Now, speaking of sort of fall and everything else, we got to be looking forward to Microsoft's strategy here for the holiday shopping season. The holiday shopping season is going to be pivotal this year. We've said that the past couple years, but I think this year more so than ever, because supply constraints drug on through 2 holiday shopping seasons so far. And so I think this is going to be a big time for Microsoft to have a lot of product on shelves and a lot of marketing efforts pushing it, because now it should be a lot easier to go get your console off a shelf. Now, what do we expect to see? I think we're going to start to see the year of the bundle. I think it's about time, and the alignment seems to be coming. This could be in terms of game bundling or potentially controller bundles inside, in the box. So you get 2 controllers instead of 1 or something along those lines. But Microsoft hasn't really aggressively, I should say, pursued bundles yet with their consoles. We could also see a year of Game Pass, something along those lines. Microsoft has a lot of tricks up its sleeve to make bundles for the Xbox console a viable option, and I think that might be their marketing effort this year. And again, the pricing cut could happen as well, or they could also do sort of a masked pricing cut where the pricing stays the same, but again, you get an extra controller, or you get a year of Game Pass or something along those lines that really help propel and set the expectations apart for what Xbox is able to achieve day one. Now, we can't forget the biggest thing of all that is going to be happening in the year ahead for Xbox. You've got games, you've got everything else, but there is a roughly $70 billion transaction that is going to happen, and that is Activision, and we are all waiting for Microsoft to announce when they think it will close. Now, when they initially signed the ink that says, hey, we're going to buy you, it was a June 30th deadline. Now, this is the upcoming June 30th, not the one that just passed. Keep that in mind. They expect a long tail for this. So what do we expect in the year ahead? I think we're going to start to see more information coming out about where they are in that journey. The UK just announced that they are going to be looking into this acquisition at the end of the day. So there's still a lot of steps to go, and I do not expect this to close anytime anytime soon in relative terms. I think we would be looking at potentially earliest around the holiday season if everything goes well, but we're still waiting to see what sort of concessions Microsoft may have to make to try to acquire this. I still think that they do have a better than good chance to actually make the acquisition because Sony is bigger. You have a lot of competition in this space, and so Microsoft should, in my opinion, be able to buy this gaming company. The question is, what are they going to have to give up, or what sort of promises are they going to have to make? Keeping that in mind, I don't think Microsoft's going to announce any more gaming specific acquisitions until this closes, because it would put in jeopardy this type of an acquisition. Imagine they're going to go out and buy somebody else, and all of a sudden it's like, well, look, you're trying to close Activision, you're trying to buy these guys. Sure, individually it's not a big deal, but when you start piling all this together, it maybe doesn't make sense. So I don't think Microsoft is going to do anything to put in jeopardy that acquisition, because it is so pivotal to their go forward strategy. And then, of course, assuming that it does close in 23, the fiscal year that is, what happens next? I think a lot of us are up in arms, kind of wondering, like, how quickly will Call of Duty hit Game Pass? Because that's a big deal. That's a big revenue generator. That's a big leverage that Microsoft can push towards Game Pass to really, really set it apart. Of course, you have Bethesda. There's a whole smattering of titles that will happen, and quickly wondering how quickly, and if I say quickly again, it'll be even better, how quickly everything will end up on Game Pass. It might take some time, but hopefully not too long. So I was just putting together some thoughts, and I grabbed some thoughts from the community. You can always follow on Twitter. That's where we sort of, ideate over some of these things, about wondering, like, what are sort of expectations for the year ahead. I'm sure Microsoft has trying to put a few, little things up its sleeve. There's always the, Joe Corden is convinced, or believes that Microsoft is at least working on potentially an Xbox handheld. I'm not necessarily convinced that's a viable strategy going forward. I don't think Nintendo Switch and its success, I think, is a completely different market than what Microsoft would try to do. Either way, Microsoft loves to drop surprises. Maybe the GoldenEye is a surprise. Maybe the handheld, I'm still not convinced. But either way, I'd love to know what you guys hope to see in 2023. Are there big things that I missed? Big things that we should dive into? As always, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.